Thank you very much for coming to Signal. It's great to have you here, and we're really excited this year to have a special track of content for people who are bridging the worlds of business and technology, because we know there's a lot of interesting things happening at the intersection of how to build an organization that's able to harness technology to compete effectively in the marketplace. And so they came to me and they said, Jeff, what should we talk about at this business track? And I said, look, the most important thing to talk about in a technology meets business story is to hear what Ries has to say. I don't know how many people have heard Eric speak before. Yeah, so he's one of the smartest people thinking about how to build not just the technology to innovate, but also the organization, the mindset, and the culture inside of a company, big or small, to build a culture of innovation. And so thank you very much, Eric, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
So to start off, just because everybody may not know, can you explain what the Lean Startup is?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for that very generous introduction. So prepare everybody for disappointment. Can't live up to that, but I'll do my best. My background is as an engineer. I grew up programming computers. You can picture me as that nerdy kid in the parents' basement. All I want to do is program computers.
I can picture that.
Yeah, you can picture that. And some of you may be familiar with the story personally, or you have a friend. So when I found out that you could get paid for programming, it was like one of the greatest days of my life. I couldn't believe it. It was like, to me, that you could get paid to play video games all day long. It was just something that I thought you did it because it was, for me, as natural and as exciting as breathing. And so, when I got a computer science degree, I wound up doing a lot of stuff on the technology side. And when I finally got bitten by the startup bug, I had this experience of building really amazing technology for one startup after another, where everything went really well from a technical point of view, but for whatever reason, the customers didn't read the business plan. And so, so you do this plan. The plan would say, like, you're going to build this product for this number of years, and you spend this amount of money, and you build this amazing product, all these great features, and customers are going to love it. You launch the product, and then everyone knows we want to have a hockey stick-shaped graph, right? So you want to have hockey stick, growth on this amazing new product, just like all your favorite famous entrepreneurs. And I kept having this experience where you would launch the product, and people forget that the defining part of the hockey stick shape is the long, flat part. So we'd be going on month in, month out after the launch, and we'd be like, this plan is genius. It says here, right, this month we should have almost no customers and almost no revenue, and we're right on track. So we're set, the hockey stick to commence in 3, 2, 1. Wait a second. And it's like, how do you know if, when you're on that flat part, if you're going to be in the nice long flat part into the indefinite horizon, or whether you in fact will hockey stick? So I kept having the experience, a very frustrating experience, of doing exactly what we said we were going to do, building amazing technology, if I do say so myself, building it agile and efficient, and using all the best industry buzzwords that you could find, and yet the customers didn't show. So Lean Startup was my attempt to codify a set of principles for how to avoid that happening to me, and then eventually to my friends, and then eventually to a lot of other people in the world who found out about it, and I eventually wrote the book, The Lean Startup. And it's called Lean Startup because we borrow ideas from lean manufacturing around cycle time and speed of iteration. And we try to apply that disciplined thinking to the process of innovation itself. And in very brief, the whole idea is that entrepreneurship is about trying to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So in situations where you can't forecast what's going to happen in the future, you don't know if the dogs will eat the dog food, to borrow a favorite engineering expression. You don't know what customers are going to do. And so because you don't know, you have your hypothesis, your vision of where you're trying to go, and we try to do rapid experimentation, scientific-style experiments, to discover which elements of the vision are really right on, where are we in sync with what customers want, and where are we wrong. And if we discover that we're wrong, we use our favorite Lean Startup buzzword, we pivot to a different strategy. So that's Lean Startup in a nutshell.
And so the word startup is in there,
yeah.
Right? So you think of, it's just for like the Soma, hipster companies.
Yeah.
But it's not just for startups, right?
Yeah, I remember you Soma hipster. I remember having lunch with Max Levchin in South Park. Everyone, for the people who live here, know where that is, right in the heart of Soma. This is now a number of years ago, and we got into a major fight over which hipster coffee place we should go to for coffee after lunch. So like when people hear startup, I think that's kind of what they have in mind.
fighting
But,
over
yeah, it's like, which single batch brew, coffee. I think I wanted to go to Blue Bottle, but that wasn't cool enough for him, or vice versa. I can't remember now. But in any event, and if you hang out in that area, in that scene, it's easy to believe that like being a startup is what you see in the movies. You live in a garage and you eat ramen noodles, and you're heroically creating the future. Like, if you're in the social network, you write with those cool whiteboard pens on those cool whiteboards that they obviously have at Harvard. And that's what makes you an entrepreneur. And one of the things that I thought was really unusual, when I was doing the research for the Lean Startup and I started to write and think about what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? What is it? I came up with this definition, the one I just shared with you, trying to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And what I thought was strange about that definition was like, that doesn't really say anything about size of company, industry, sector. It just says you don't know what you're doing. That seems like it could maybe apply to an awful lot of people in this world.
So anybody dealing with that?
Yeah, it's like, listen, most people don't really want to raise their hand. It's like, hi. but yeah, that's what it means to be an entrepreneur. So at the time I wrote the book, I just when you're an author, you try to make the most clear statement of what you believe possible. So I said, therefore, these ideas apply in all sectors, all industries, all company sizes, from the smallest to the large, as confidently as I could as an author. Now, the truth is, at that time, I didn't know if anyone was really going to take that seriously, because it wasn't like I had a lot of proof that this was true. This was a deduction from first principles. But that was 2011, so it's coming on 4 years now since that book was published. And one of the amazing things that has happened is, in the intervening years, like a number of the world's most largest and craziest organizations have kind of called me up and said, okay, we accept your challenge. First time it happened, I said, what challenge? What are you talking about? Like, well, you said this could work for me, in my gigantic organization, so let's do it. And the first time I got that call, I was like, that's not really my problem. Best of luck. I'm a startup person. I'm arguing with coffee and Soma. Like, it's not really my department. I don't work in that kind of company. I don't have that experience. And it was not me, but a number of very visionary people inside of a number of established organizations and governments too, who kind of dragged me kicking and screaming to the realization that not only was this like theoretically true, but practically speaking, even in the world's largest companies, there are hundreds or even thousands of entrepreneurs already working there. And these ideas around Lean Startup can help build a management system around them to help them be successful and even thrive. And that's been my work of the last several years. And what's strange, sitting next to Jeff having this conversation, is that this is the thing that really nobody believes, honestly, about my work these days. I have this dual world. I work in these big industrial companies, like I said, governments, very bureaucratic, large organizations. And I also still work here in Silicon Valley. So I hang out with hyper-growth companies like Twilio, companies that are past product market fit, but that are still trying to figure out how do we build a culture of continuous innovation. And the thing that nobody believes is the challenges and the opportunities are really the same in both cases. Because what matters is not how big the company is today or how much money a company makes today. The question is, what is our vision for what the company should be tomorrow? And I think that what we're starting to see is kind of a new vision, a new kind of shared idea among a number of CEOs and leaders of companies of all different sizes to say that the blueprint for an organization that can grow through continuous innovation, that's really designed for the 21st century, that's going to look a lot different than the kind of 20th century management models that we have inherited. And so that's why we wind up having very similar conversations across these really wide number of domains.
I think it's interesting, right? We talked this morning, I made the analogy to the Lego movie. How many have seen the Lego movie, by the way? Yeah, a lot of people.
I guess it was popular.
Right, and I talked about how like there's certain companies like who don't have that culture of building yet.
Yeah.
In fact, they've been companies have been around a long time. Maybe it's been almost beaten into them like, oh well, you can't build software. And people often have said like when we talk about APIs and composability and how you can pull pieces together and really iterate quickly, sometimes people would say, sure, but are big companies doing that?
Yeah.
Right, and I often think about that like such an odd question, right? Because at the bottom, like developers know this is the right way to build. Right? They know that like iterating fast, listening to customers, using agile methodologies are the way to iterate to a solution. Yet somewhere between the developers who know that and like the CEO, right? Because how many CEOs or CIOs say, I wish all this innovation would stop, right? Like, why do these people keep innovating? Stop that. Like, no, of course. Like everybody says innovation is what they want, but the question is, okay, great, how to get it, right? How to build the organizational machine that is aligned towards enabling that is the biggest, is the biggest challenge I think probably most organizations face. I mean, I don't know, I'm kind of curious, how many folks here would you identify like your company is a startup, right? So there's a good number of people, but how many would say your organization is like a mature organization, right? And if you're a mature organization, is figuring out how to get the wheels of innovation going in your company a challenge. I wonder how someone can go about bringing lean and the cultural changes that actually are needed. It's not just technology, it's actually changing how the organization works, how it thinks about the notion of challenges and how you're going to solve those. What tips do you have for someone who's working in an organization who's trying to build that innovation just into the core culture of the company at some level of the company?
The curse of my professional life is that almost every audience I ever speak to has that exact split. We got people who think of themselves in startups and people who think they're not. And it's like if I could just separate them into two different groups, it'd be a lot easier. But they're always together. And actually, I like that because like I said, I think the challenges we face are more similar than different. It's my customers who often complain of having to share space with those other people. So thank you for coming together and not fighting. So here's the funny thing about this. This is a leadership challenge. So when I meet with the leaders of companies and they feel like their organization is not producing enough innovation, I always tell them the same thing. It's like, okay, well, that's no problem. First, let's look in the mirror. Okay, look in the mirror. Now you're looking at the problem. If you're not getting,
you?
No, I usually get fired on that immediately, which is great. I use it as a screening mechanism to figure out who I should work with, because people who don't want to hear that kind of blunt truth from their consultant, like, I'm not the right person to hire. There's all kinds of consultants that you can pay to tell you what you want to hear, and they're great, and you should totally hire them instead. So I have the anti-sales strategy. But the reason is companies operate by the systems of incentives and accountability that senior leadership creates. And in most organizations, I'm not making this up, most middle managers are paid to eradicate innovation. It's actually their job to make sure that it doesn't happen. And when I say that to most companies, they get so offended, like, how dare I suggest such a thing? But it's very easy proof to make. Most modern management tools, that we all inherited from the 20th century, have at their core a focus on standardization and making sure that the work process that people will do is the same everywhere, so it's consistent across the organization. You don't want any individual manager to have too much discretion, because what if they left and you have to be replaced? So we're focused on making sure that each individual manager is operating according to a standard playbook. So what happens, and there's a lot of good theory for why that is. In manufacturing and in traditional business, variation and variability are our enemy. We want consistency and smooth results. But innovation is an example of positive variability, right? When you engage in an innovation project, it's not like you spend 10% of the effort of the project and you get 10% of the benefit. Like, sometimes you spend 10% of the cost and you get 0% or massive liability, and sometimes you spend 10% of the effort and you have a massive breakthrough success. So it's extremely unpredictable. And since we're trying to prevent unpredictability in our business, because we want to have clear, consistent quarterly earnings and all that kind of stuff, we are preventing people from doing the activities that allow them to innovate. And the example I always use is, imagine you worked in the music industry, in the Napster era. So let's go back in the 90s. Right? If you're a middle manager in most companies, every day of your life, I don't have to tell you, some of you are living this right now, every freaking day of your life, somebody walks into your office and they're like, boss, I got a great idea. We should give away our product for free for no reason. And your job as a middle manager is to be like, thank you for that feedback, glad to have your buy-in, but let me remind you, we have a corporate strategy and a plan for this year and this quarter and this month and this week and this day. And so, like, can I just redirect you? If we just do the plan, everything's going to be fine. And like, oh, thanks, boss. Good, got it. Back to work, right? Every once in a while, not most of the time, not even some of the time, but like every once in a while, like, you're in the music industry in the Napster era, you're like, we should give our music away for free on the internet. That's actually the right thing to do. And if you don't do that, you're totally screwed. Now, you're paying your managers to not do those crazy things, to prevent those crazy things from harming the company's core profitability. But every once in a while, they're the right thing. Well, how can you tell the difference between the good ideas and the crazy ideas? Your middle managers in most organizations are not empowered to use their own judgment to make those decisions. Their job is to keep everybody on track with the corporate strategy. That's what they get paid to do, and they get fired if they don't do that. And so most organizations, including the startups that I work with, are built to these kind of functional silos where everyone is like taking their part of the plan and operating it. And what I find especially ironic is every once in a while, if you, like, imagine you visualize a modern corporation, like, from the God's eye view, and you have these kind of, individual silos. I like to visualize them like gigantic Pringles cans, right? So you're the God's eye view, look down. If you pop the top off the can and look in the silo, and you look in the engineering silo, you're like, oh, look at this highly iterative, agile development. That's pretty cool. Pop them in the marketing silo, like, look at this customer development, iterative thing. Designers are doing design thinking. The operations guys are doing DevOps. Supply chain, they're doing lean manufacturing. Like, wow, each of these silos is operating in a very iterative, modern way. This is great. And you zoom out, you're like, this must be a corporation that does highly iterative work and is like super hypothesis-driven and customer-centric. And then you're like, oh, but wait a minute. The work product flows from department to department in a strictly linear way. So the overall organization is still stuck in this old waterfall mentality, even if each individual function is doing something highly iterative. And in those organizations, going back to the CEO and why it's so hard to be the boss in this kind of situation, every day, one of the functional leaders of those organizations comes into the boss and says, boss, this company's not iterative enough. We're not agile enough. And the boss says, I know, totally. What do we do? He's like, I got an idea. Why don't you put my function in charge of all the other functions? And if we make everybody do DevOps, then we're going to be fine. And the boss, oh, good idea, except that 5 minutes later, hey, we should make everybody do design thinking. And if you read some of the books on these topics, like that's basically their recommendation. Like, a lot of the classics of the field that they basically like, make everybody do my system. And you may have noticed people in one function are not especially keen to adopt the system from some other function and basically have them lorded over them for all time. So what happens is, even when we have kind of far-sighted individuals in one of those functions who sees the need to act in an agile way, it's really hard to go across. And this comes all the way back to the issue around software. Most people in most organizations do not want to do software things. They're not software people. They're not interested. So like I know a lot of organizations that have an agile center of excellence or some kind of like agile practice in the IT or the software part of their business. But they have had a really hard time getting the non-software people in the organization to adopt it. Actually, I hear the same story of people who know on the manufacturing side. Like everybody has the same frustration. And one of the powers of a lean startup is it's not tied to any specific function. And it allows every function to speak the language of business rather than the language of their specific thing. So like, you can't put your burn down chart in the company's annual report and be like, guess what? We're having really good story points this quarter. Like Wall Street doesn't care. In fact, nobody cares. Right? Like outside of the teams that are working in those systems, nobody cares. So we've got to be able to translate these like ideas around hypothesis testing and customer and all this iteration. We have to be able to translate that into general purpose business terms so that our innovation teams can be held accountable for success by people who are by definition not innovators. So like the CFO of the organization, the CEO, the people who are putting up the money to fund these projects, they are not themselves entrepreneurs. That's not their job. Their job is to make sure that the companies that are the teams that are spending the company's money are spending it well. And that's really kind of the crux of the issue is how do you demonstrate progress in an innovation situation when you can't use something like story points or velocity as your metric. So, but also you can't use the traditional financial metrics like ROI because on the long flat part of the hockey stick, the ROI is negative by definition.
I always think about when people say like big companies, they think about these new initiatives, and they always say the question, well, sure, but is it going to move the needle?
Yeah.
Right? And like, if there's some company with, X tens or hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue or whatever, like, yeah, well, in order to move the needle, this product has to make $10 billion in the next 2 years. But you say, well, great, that's a recipe for never trying anything.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you have to guarantee me $10 billion.
But what do you see? I mean, you sort of get this sense that like, that's where experimentation falls down because people say, well, it's not worth it if it's not going to move the needle in some impossibly short period of time.
Yeah. The way this usually works is most managers have been trained to do their budgeting. And we're supposed to be talking about innovation and developers. We're talking about budgeting. I know it's like super boring, but this is the toxic waste that destroys all innovations. I think is what we're talking about. The budgeting process generally is give me a bunch of projects and let's rank them by ROI. So we'll invest in the most ROI, highest ROI project first, and then we'll work our way down. So think about what ROI is, two numbers divided into each other that in an innovation situation are both undefined. It's like, how much money are we going to make? Unknown. How much is it going to cost? Also unknown. So the product, dividing the one number to the other produces like, I don't know. But you can't rank I don't know in the spreadsheet for product managers. So most entrepreneurs, the first time they try this, they're like, okay, no problem, I'll produce a spreadsheet that shows what the possible ROI is for this project, and then we'll get it ranked. But I'm going to be conservative and realistic in my estimates. And the first time you do that, you will discover that your project ranks all the way at the bottom. Because realistic conservative estimates for your, thank you. Your realistic conservative estimates, are not good enough. They're not going to move the needle. So your project doesn't get funded. So now we're like, well, I want to get my project funded. So how do I do that? That's pretty easy. I just need to increase the R and decrease the I. So I'll just start cranking it up every time until I get funded. So we create these fantasy plans. And entrepreneurs are pretty good at this. It's like, these spreadsheets are very sensitive to initial conditions and to various assumptions. So you can make it say whatever you want. And in Silicon Valley, in entrepreneurial circles, we have what we call the plausible promise, which is like, what is the most ridiculous amount of money you can promise that doesn't make you sound crazy? It's like, 3 to 5 years from now, we're going to be making how much money per year that will get you excited enough to want to fund this project, but it's not so big that this person doesn't know what they're talking about. So I'm like, we're going to make $4 trillion in a year. It's like, nah, this guy's crazy. And it's pretty easy. The culture of the company and the size of the company's revenue determines what it is. So like I remember I was working with a company that has, I don't know, they make so much money a year, like I can't even understand the order of magnitude of it. It's so large. And one of the teams was presenting to a bunch of senior leaders their proposed plan for this like classic waterfall development project. And I'm supposed to come in and help them adopt Lean Startup. And because we had all these senior leaders, I asked them to present, well, tell me the currently approved plan. And they showed me this bar chart. I'll never forget this as long as I live. It's a bar graph of revenue by year for a new product. It is listed out in great precision for the next 25 years. Of course, the first 5 bars on the chart are blank, because for the 5 years that we're in stealth R&D, obviously there's no revenue. And then in the 6th year, I don't know the numbers now. It was like we make $100 million that year, and by year 10, we're making like, $500 million. Anyway, by the end, we're making billions of dollars a year, which I thought was just like, this fantasy plan is ludicrous. But inside of this company, that's what it takes to move the needle. You got to be making billions a year from a product that's not really worth doing. And I remember I just asked everybody, it was a very senior group of people who were in this room for this workshop, and I said, okay, everybody raise your hand if you believe this forecast. And I am not making this up, I swear to God. Every person in the room raised their hand. They're like, listen, kid, I don't think you really understand. This is our approved business plan. Our smartest finance people have signed off on this. We have made a tens of millions of dollar investment this year on the base of this plan. Like, of course we believe. We wouldn't have made the investment.
We are highly paid to believe this.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, how dare you even suggest? I was like, I'm sorry, my mistake. Let me ask a different way. How many people in this room are confident that in the year, and I just picked a number at random, in the year 2021, you are going to make, $2.357 billion from this new product? Really? And everyone's hand goes down. You can see them all kind of looking around like, oh, I don't actually believe that at all. It's like, okay, so can we admit this is a project with some uncertainty around it? And you guys have made this huge bet based on a number of totally wild assertions that this entrepreneur has made. Now, we tend to blame the entrepreneur for making these unrealistic fantasy plans, but we created the system that forced them to make the fantasy plan to get the project funded. Entrepreneurs will do whatever. You make them jump through hoops to get the project funded, they'll do whatever ludicrous thing you ask. So this is like no dumber than any of the 10 other things I had to do to get this project funded. So whose fault is it really? It goes back to looking in the mirror. So now that we've admitted that we don't know what the ROI of this project is, how can we make these decisions about which projects to fund and which ones not? And then that unlocks a whole different conversation about what are the right metrics to hold people accountable to, what is the right way to do budgeting and make investment decisions in this kind of situation. And it's really, for most people who've been trained in traditional management, for those of the senior leaders who have come up through the ranks of these traditional organizations, it's quite a challenge. It's a very different way of thinking. But really, I think it's the only path forward.
Wow. There's one question I have in there, which is you sort of said, well, we have this tool called strategy that middle managers use to tell people not to do things.
Yeah.
Right? So would you say, hey, companies shouldn't have strategies?
Yeah, no.
Well,
I would. Yeah, no.
It's actually a serious question because I've toyed around with the idea that at Twilio, as we build the company, we have strategy sessions, we have things like that, right, that happen. And I've toyed around with and they always kind of drive me nuts. And I've always toyed around with the idea of guess what? There's only one strategy for all of business, not our business, all of business, right? Which is understand the needs of your customer and serve them.
Yeah.
Right? And if that's the one strategy every team takes away, wouldn't we be a better company, right? And I'm always think back, and my example here is Google Plus, right? I hope no one from Google's in the room, right? So Google, they clearly have this strategy, we're going to go beat Facebook, and we have this product to do it called Google Plus, and everybody must adhere to this strategy and put Google Plus and cram it into their product. And like, if any of you talk to like Googlers, like product managers at Google, people were like really resistant. They're like, our customers don't want this, right? And as users, we were all like, why is all this weird stuff happening to them, all like Google stuff, right? And the people closest to the customer knew that. And they were saying, stop cramming, but it didn't stop. And you end up with a social network that is not, has not been successful, and products that got kind of trampled along the way, and people kind of pissed off. And it was sort of, to me, a classic example of strategy that trumped actually listening to your customer. Yeah. Sorry if anyone from Google is in the room. Well, but you probably agree with me.
It's not like they don't know it. I mean, Jesus.
Right? And I just like, from the outside, you look at it and you're like, wow, like I hope we never make that mistake.
Yeah, so I think it's Chris Dixon who coined the term strategy tax, which is the tax that a product, a product inside a company pays for having to adhere to the company's overall strategy. And too many strategies are that I would add a second criticism of most company strategies. There's not just that they're not customer centric. They're also, a lot of them are prescriptive. They say what's going to happen in the future, which I think is quite dangerous. In fact, I was reading, when I was doing the research for my book, I remember reading one of the classic strategy texts. I don't remember which of Michael Porter's massive tomes it was, but one of them, I want to understand corporate strategy. And I'm, reading the definitive work on the subject, and it's describing like hundreds of pages of describing how to come up with a good strategy, what makes a strategy good versus a bad one. And then there was like a page at the end of a chapter, and it's like, now remember, a strategy is just a hypothesis about what you think is going to happen. You got to make sure to test it with the real world to make sure that it's correct. And I was like, finally, he's speaking my language. I'm sure the rest of the chapters of this book are going to be like, how the F do you do that? I'm like dying to know. And of course, the next chapter is like, anyway, back to strategy theory. And that was it. That was the whole mention of that topic. It was like one paragraph. I was like, by the way, make sure, like, that's very helpful. But any tips? He's like, well, that's not really my department. And I was like, okay, well, whose department is it? And finally, someone was like, Eric, it's your department. I was like, okay, I guess because we don't treat our strategies like in the right way, which is to treat them as a series of hypotheses that need to be tested. And I think it is important, even in the big companies where you want something that moves the needle. Like that criticism is right on. It's no point doing something if there's no upside potential. If the total available market for a product is really small, if there really isn't, if it doesn't solve a big problem in the world, it's not worth the energy of an entrepreneur to go after it. So I think doing the analysis that says, instead of saying this is going to work, you say, if these facts are true, then this is going to work. And strategic thinking and strategic frameworks are really good at helping you identify what are the things that have to be true for this to work out. And that can include things like competitive responses. It can include things like industry structures and power relationships and all that stuff.
Or customers, you might ask questions you might ask your customers.
Right, exactly.
If customers act this way, or if customers want X, then...
Every strategy I've ever seen for any kind of business, and I see this in the nonprofit world and in governments too, like at the end of the day, there's always some footnote that someone's like asterisk, appendix B, by the way, in order for this to work, a series of human beings have to change their behavior. But like pay no attention to that like massive risk factor. It's like a giant meteor hurtling towards the earth of this project. Like I'm sure everyone, because human beings are not like psyched to change their behavior as much as possible, right? It's like the most difficult thing in almost every project is we have to get people to do a behavior that we want to see. Like they have to pull out their credit card and pay us money. They have to adopt some new social network. They have to travel to a different place. They have to learn a new set of tools. Like something is different because of our product than before. And to view that as not like sometimes when we identify those risk factors, people can say, well, therefore, let's not do it. This project all of a sudden seems too risky, seems too hard. Let's not do it. But say, no, the purpose of identifying the risks and making them clear is so that we can then design experiments to go see if they're true. So like in that example I was telling you about the company with the 5-year stealth R&D and then the 25-year revenue projection, like I remember asking them, how are customers going to buy this product? And they were like, well, our strategic analysis is as follows. We're entering a new market with a very strong entrenched competitor who's the market leader. Their technology sucks. Our technology is way better. And I described it all better. I'm like, totally, I'm sure you're right. But tell me about how customers are going to buy this. And like, well, the competitor has an amazing distributor network of, that form deep relationships with customers and provide excellent service and support for their crappy product. And that's why and how people buy it. And I was like, excellent. And do we have such a distributor network in place? They're like, no. I was like, because I'm reading your business plan. I don't remember it saying, I don't even see it mentioned. When are we going to do that? They're like, well, obviously after we're done building the product, then we'll go build this network. And I was like, okay, but when's that going to happen in the plan? And that's like 5 years from now. I'm like, well, what if we can't get anybody to buy this product? is that going to be a problem? And they were like, I can't even describe to you how uncomfortable they were even talking about this, because they're like, there's all these company executives like right here. You're kind of making us look bad. I'm like, why am I making you look bad? They're like, because you're raising a thing that might go wrong with this project, and that could harm our momentum. So could you kind of be quiet and not say that? It's like, okay, but how about instead of burying our head in the sand and pretending there are no risk factors, what if we said, okay, look, let's admit that this actually is a risk factor, and why don't we start learning about what it's going to take to sell this product, not 5 years from now, but maybe tomorrow. And because I had all these senior executives in the room, I'm like, okay, does anyone in the room have a customer that might want to buy this product? And one of the executives was like, oh man, I have a customer that's coming into my office like every day begging for this product. I was like, aha, engineers, this is a physical product. How long would it take to build one unit of this product? And they looked at me like I was nuts. They're like, you obviously don't understand supply chain and manufacturing. Once you set up the production line and set up the supply chain, like, it's the same amount of time to produce 1,000 as one. So, that's the whole point of mass production. I was like, I'm sorry, my mistake. Sorry about that. I don't mean one line of products. One unit. Could it be done? They're like, well, of course, we have to do, in fact, in order to do the testing of the supply, of course, we have to like build a prototype unit like right now. It could be done in 90 days. And then one of the engineers is like, actually, we already have an existing product that could be modified. The engineers start to do their thing. And like next thing you know, like in 30 days, we can have a prototype unit ready to go. And I'm like, hey, well, I got a customer over here. And I'm like ready to broker a deal, right? I'm like, hey, we could go try to sell this one unit to one customer right now. And then we would learn something very interesting about how hard this thing is to sell or not sell today instead of 5 years from now. And I was like basically ready to broker the deal in the room. I was like very excited. And one of the other senior executives was just sitting there, like arms crossed, very unhappy. And he finally said, I'm sorry, excuse me. What is the point of selling one unit? 5 seconds ago, you were telling me how we were going to make $4 billion a year. And now we're going to make what, 25 cents? And like to him, it was as if I had suggested that if he like saw a quarter on the street and picked it up and put it in his pocket, he had improved the company's balance sheet. Like that's how dumb my suggestion seemed to him. And I was like, listen, you're totally right. If you believe in this plan and there's nothing to be learned, then this experiment is a waste of time. And I'm not making this up. He was totally satisfied with that answer. He's like, okay, good. But luckily, some of his colleagues who were in the room were like, whoa, wait a second. Didn't we just say that we don't know of this plan? And like, we started to have a real conversation about what are the actual risk factors and what could be done to mitigate them. And as long as we're not talking in vanity metrics terms, in ROI and gross revenue, right? As long as we're focused on what are the individual customer behaviors that have to happen, then we can change the whole way that these kind of projects are funded and held accountable. And like, for those of you who haven't been through this before, who maybe think that the company you're in could never do what I'm describing, like, let me just be kind of the person to say, I was pretty skeptical too. Like I said, the first time a big company asked me to come do this, I was just like, what are you talking about? It's not my problem. But I have come all the way 180 from that point of view. I have seen it with my own eyes. I have seen the transformation that can happen when you unlock the power of entrepreneurs in organizations of a lot of different sizes, and it's pretty cool. So I've seen it. It is real. It is possible. And I guarantee your company is not the most bureaucratic and political one. Like they're doing this in the federal government, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. So if you think your organization is more political than Obamacare, you got to pay. You got to really reset. So like if they can do it, I don't know what your excuse is. Anyway.
Cool. All right, we have to wrap up because it's happy hour time. So we're now preventing the drinking. But I did want to ask one question, Eric. You just finished your Kickstarter campaign.
Yes.
Can you tell us what the book is about and when people can read it? And what the workshop is about tomorrow?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I did a Kickstarter campaign for something I'm calling the Leader's Guide, which is basically like a workbook for if you think about Lean Startup as kind of how to get started, Leader's Guide is how to get other people on your team to adopt Lean Startup, how to build a culture and organization, the kind of stuff that we've been talking about today. Twilio was very generous to be a sponsor of the Kickstarter campaign and helped us become the #1 Kickstarter book campaign of all time. So thank you very much. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Don't clap. The book hasn't actually been written yet, but when it is finally written, yeah, exactly. That's Kickstarter for you. That is the ultimate MVP. But tomorrow, we're doing a workshop in the morning. You can get kind of a little bit of a sneak peek of some of the content from that. So come check it out.
So if you're a leader, building organization, small or big, and you're interested in learning more about like the lean startup methodologies and how to adopt it and how you grow your company with it or how you change your company with it, seriously, you should come to the workshop tomorrow. Eric's putting this together for our audience, for you guys, and we really hope that you can make it and learn something and take away from it. And I also would say I bet Eric will learn from you, which is part of the process. Eric's writing the book, and what he learns by doing these workshops will influence the book and the content. So please take part, participate, and we hope you enjoy it.
All right. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Always a pleasure.